Pokemon series is a weird one. The series has been around for 25 plus years, and yet it's still borderline exactly the same as when it started. But every once in a while, you get the itch to pick up a game and catch them all, and I did that with Pokemon Violet, the most recent Pokemon game, and a game that, as far as I can tell, everybody hates. So why did I buy it? I don't know. Felt like playing Pokemon. Was it worth buying? Let's talk about it. Now, out of the gate, I gotta say, I'm a simple man when it comes to Pokemon. I do not care about late game or leveling or catching shinies or any of that stuff. I'm very basic with my Pokemon gameplay. I just want to collect the Pokemon, catch them all, go get all my 8 badges, fight the Elite Four, do all that stuff. Maybe that is why I enjoyed this game as much as I did, and it might be surprising to hear that I did enjoy this game. I found myself really having a great time with Pokemon Violet. The main reason for this was just the Pokemon catching itself. There's a lot that can be said negative about this game from a technical perspective especially, but one thing that it did do fairly well was let you see these Pokemon out in the wild as you're running around and let you try to catch any of them. The Pokemon themselves don't really do much other than hang out in the field together, but it was still fun to see little packs of the same Pokemon all hanging out. You see the little birds flying, insects crawling around, all the different types are well represented, and they all look different. The bigger Pokemon are huge, the small Pokemon are small. Sometimes you even run into one without even noticing, and then you're stuck in a Pokemon battle. But that actually added a lot to the overall immersion that I felt in this game. Yes, that immersion was then broken when you can't go inside any buildings in the game. Even the Pokemon centers are all outdoor stands that you walk up to. But you're not really here for necessarily exploring a world or a city. You're here to catch a bunch of Pokemon. And to finally see them sort of living in a habitat was great. For me, it took a lot that was good about the Arceus game and really added to the overall exploration and feel when it comes to catching Pokemon. Now, the Pokemon themselves, I don't know. I can't keep up. I don't actually know which Pokemon were new in this game or were old from older games. There's a few that I know. I could probably tell you the first 250 or so. After that, it's kind of a crapshoot. They all seem familiar, but who knows? I could be totally wrong. But I do kind of like what they seem to have done, which is accept the fact that it's okay to have essentially 7 different bird Pokemon that just look like normal birds. They don't have to be these crazy monsters, and there's a few dog-looking Pokemon, a few squirrel-looking Pokemon. I kind of like that. It actually feels a little more realistic to kind of the world we live in. Like, you go outside, you see squirrels, chipmunks, different kinds of birds, pigeons, doves, whatever, blue jays, cardinals, whatever else you may see. So I actually like the approach they seem to have taken when it comes to adding new Pokemon in some of these later generations. I remember in Gen 3 and 4 especially, it felt like they thought every Pokemon had to be some totally new and unique design that was not similar to any Pokemon they had already made before, and that's kind of what opened the door to some of those weird pile of garbage, ice cream cone, sandcastle Pokemon types that got made fun of, and I think deservedly so. This generation of Pokemon games also kind of made waves for being the first, and I'm using heavy air quotes here, open world Pokemon games. Technically, yes, these are open world games. You can leave the school that you're enrolled at the beginning of the game and go wherever you want, but it's clear that there was a specific path that you are supposed to follow and not deviate from. There's 3 main objectives for you to complete throughout the course of the game. The first is your standard collect all 8 gym badges and then fight the Elite Four. The second has to do with the legendary Pokemon in this game, which you actually get right at the start, but it can't battle yet. It's injured, hurt, something, and so you need to go collect these different Herba Mysticas to feed to your legendary creature and bring it back to full health. In the meantime, you can ride the legendary Pokemon like a bike, and as you get more of these herbs, it will unlock new traversal techniques, jumping higher, being able to glide, climbing up walls, things like that. The final one is essentially your Team Rocket of this game. Team Star is this group of students who used to be bullied and now they fought back against their bullies, but they've become the bullies or something. All the stories are pretty generic, they're pretty basic. I don't think any Pokemon game, and I'm sure I'll get comments below, but I don't think any Pokemon game has ever really won awards for its storytelling. You're not really going into a Pokemon game because of its gripping, deep narrative. All of these objectives are serviceable, but again, they're spread out in such a way on the map that there is very clearly a linear path that you're supposed to go on. You go to the first gym that's closest to the school. That's the lowest level gym you're going to fight. And then the next thing on your map is the next highest level. Outside of 1 or 2 cases where they toss in a really high level area in between where you currently are and a further area on the map, for the most part, you're going to go up a pretty linear curve as far as difficulty goes. There's no level scaling, so the levels are the levels, and you just essentially go on your journey. So yes, technically it's open world, but it mostly plays like a linear Pokemon game for the most part. There's some minor decisions you can make, but really, you're going to feel like you're on a single path. On the gameplay side, this is still Pokemon. There's nothing that I felt was new or noteworthy to mention. You can terrestrialize your Pokemon now, which essentially just makes them stronger at a specific their base core type and makes moves of that type stronger. I don't know, isn't this the same thing as like Mega Evolutions that they've already had? I don't keep up super close with the Pokemon series, so maybe I'm missing something about what's so special about this new game's approach. As far as I can tell, it was just a way to add artwork that they could sell on Pokemon cards. Maybe it comes into play in high-level competitive multiplayer PvP Pokemon. But overall, the game never felt difficult, it never felt hard. Your Pokemon are always going to be a fine level by the time you get to whatever your next objective is. Again, assuming you're going in the linear order. If you want to make things super hard on yourself, I guess you could take some underleveled Pokemon in with you and try and do it that way. Battling is just battling. There wasn't really a lot. There was a couple cases where you had 2v2 battles, but really it was mostly just 1v1, which I did find surprising since I know in earlier games in the series, little gimmicks like that were all over the place. So I was a little surprised to see that they've sort of scaled that back a bit. It also felt like there was a lot of padding in the game. The world itself actually is very large considering the number of objectives you have to go through. There's a lot of open space between the current gym, for example, and the next, say, Herba Mystica you want to go chase down. And there's a lot of Pokemon between you and that place. Not as many trainer battles. I might just be stuck in the old school Pokemon, but usually when I remember playing Red and Gold and Silver back in the day, there was trainers every 2 steps. It felt like you were always battling new trainers. Here, there's like a handful in each area that you have to really go find. I didn't feel like I naturally came across many trainers in my journey. This is not necessarily a huge negative. Those trainer battles have never been something challenging. They always just have 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 Pokemon that you can usually wipe out in one move. I just found it surprising that there was so much open space, and if you're not really looking to catch a bunch of Pokemon, then there's not much to do. So a lot of open area that you just can ignore effectively if you're not really trying to catch a lot of different and unique Pokemon. You can also send out your lead Pokemon to kind of run around with you in the field. This is sort of broken. I'm glad I didn't do it too much until the end of the game. Your Pokemon will run around and battle other Pokemon that it encounters in the field, and all of your Pokemon get experience. I didn't do this too much during the main sort of campaign, so to speak, and I'm really glad because it did always feel like I was kind of right at the level I was supposed to be at with my party to battle each of the gyms. Weirdly, at the end of the game, you do like the 8th gym, and then the Elite Four take a huge jump. The 8th gym leader had level 45 to 50-ish Pokemon, but then the Elite Four had almost level 60 Pokemon. And this was the same with all the other storylines as well. You essentially do the thing that they set you out to do, and then there's a secret sort of last group or last person that you have to go fight. And all of those had a really big jump in level. So when I got to the very end, I did start doing that, and it was very trivial to quickly bring all my Pokemon up from level 50s into the 70s just by running around and letting my Pokemon fight without having to actually go through all of the combats. So if you're using this and abusing this a lot early on, I could see you being really overleveled really quickly, making the game an essential cakewalk if you want it to be. I think that's actually good that they did that, though. We do have to remember, a game focused on 8-year-olds, right? It's made for children, it's made to sell Pokemon cards, it's made to sell Pokemon toys. So essentially giving you the option to handle that yourself. You can choose how many Pokemon to fight, you can choose how many to catch, you can choose whether or not you send your guy out, is in itself a sort of difficulty setting that the game gives you and gives you control over. Now, I unfortunately didn't encounter any of the hysterical, sort of crazy bugs that a lot of people talked about, especially back when this game first released. I assume that they've released patches and updates to remove some of those bugs. So on the whole, my experience was fairly positive with the game. That said, it is still pretty not good looking for a Switch game. Yes, I know the Switch isn't the most powerful console, but it is crazy that this game looks like this when there are some really good looking Switch games, but more importantly that it runs how it does. There were a lot of times where you get a lot of slowdown, a lot of pop-in, many times where Pokemon that I wanted to catch would just disappear from 5 feet in front of me because I took too long to toss out my Pokeball to try and fight them and catch them. It wasn't game ruining, but it definitely did impact the experience. This is definitely far from a polished game, I would say, but the fun in exploring the world, catching all the different Pokemon, doing all the battles, I think is still well worth it. If you're a fan of the Pokemon series, if you're a fan of these games, I do still think this is a game worth playing. There is something about the Pokemon series that just clicks, and maybe this is because I grew up with the original games, the Gold and Silver games, even Ruby and Sapphire. Because I have sort of that special spot in my heart for those games, nothing really plays like Pokemon. There's a bunch of Pokemon-like games, and yet I still always find myself wanting to go back to play Pokemon itself when I play them. But what do you think? Was Pokemon Violet and Scarlet worth playing? Am I silly? Let me know in the comments down below. What's your favorite Pokemon? Mine's still Squirtle. I always, to this day, pick the water starter because of Squirtle. I've never deviated from that in my many, many years of Pokemon collecting. If you liked the video, maybe hit that like button to tell YouTube that you liked the video. Consider subscribing to the channel, and I will see you all with the next video.